This is a session on finding resilience, a personal story for early ops professionals. And I'd like to draw your attention to the image on the screen. You can see it's autumn and the trees are changing color. And to cope with the changing weather and the decreasing temperature, they let go of their leaves. That's a beautiful example of resilience, of letting go as a form of resilience in nature. And that's exactly what we'll be exploring today. Resilience does not always mean pushing through, but sometimes the essence of resilience is in letting go. Let me introduce the formal agenda. I'll introduce myself and my background, and then we'll move on to part one of this session, where I'll share a personal anecdote and the lessons I learned from that and the strategies that helped me cope. And then we'll move on to part two. It's about professional resilience and how the lessons I learned through my professional journey, through my personal journey, I was able to apply in the workspace as well. While working remotely across distributed teams, experiencing tech shifts like AI and ChatGPT and large language models. And then we'll wrap up with a Q&A and discussion. So I'm Maria Madni. I have 4 years of experience as an accountant and operations associate at a remote startup that is based outside of the United States. And at the beginning of this year, I also contributed as an operations volunteer at a nonprofit called Orfed. I'm also a member at 100 Women in Finance. And right now, I'm preparing to get done with my final chartered accountancy exams. It's difficult, but definitely worth it. I just want to get over with it. And I'm a very curious person by nature. So due to that, I have a range of hobbies and interests, from design and illustration to learning languages to just randomly admiring mountains that I can see from my rooftop. I live in Islamabad, and we have the beautiful Mughal Hills here surrounding Islamabad, the city. And you can see an image of the Mughal Hills here. This is obviously a glamorized, the Instagram version. I don't get to see this view from my rooftop, but I'm pretty grateful for the view I have. You can also see an illustration I made of a coffee cup. And now we'll move on to part one of this session, where I'll be sharing the personal anecdote where I begin with my journey to finding resilience. So I had always been a very high achieving student, always a position holder. But the school that I was in was a very inclusive environment. They supported your personal interests, and just focusing on grades was not encouraged. And as I moved on with my classes, I changed schools. And this new school that I moved to had a very competitive environment. It was supposed to prepare you for the standardized university entrance exams and focus only on grades. And just seeing how achievement was celebrated and the importance of this external validation really subconsciously affected me. And without even realizing, I had a mindset shift towards societal norms and towards succumbing and accepting external expectations. I did not realize that I was slowly moving away from my values and what my interests aligned with. Along the way, as I was taking exams, I was doing well, and then came the university entrance exams, more specifically the medical college entrance exams, which is called the MCAT. I took the exam, and there's a specific aggregate that you have to reach, and I did not make the aggregate. It was a few percent less than what was required. And when everybody's asking you what happened, what's your aggregate, it just threw me away. I just could not make sense of things, like what was happening, how I could fail. Like, I had a trajectory of success, and suddenly this setback at such an important time in my life really hit me hard. And that's where my journey towards finding resilience began. What is resilience? I would like to define resilience in a personal way. Resilience is the ability to cope with tough events. It can be a job loss, a failing an exam, an illness, or maybe a loved one's death. But my personal twist here is that resilience does not always mean perseverance and endurance. The true essence of resilience is an understanding the is an understanding when to let go and when to persevere. Different people have different varying degrees of resilience. And I think the best part here is that greater resilience can be cultivated. And we will learn ways to build resilience throughout this session. There's a saying that says, when someone is drowning, that is not the time to teach them how to swim. When someone is drowning, they first need to be saved from what's weighing them down, aka the barriers to building resilience. Once they are able to get rid of the barriers to resilience, it's only then that they can learn to swim through challenging times of life with resilience. I also had to face a number of barriers to building resilience, and I'll be sharing the ones that really affected me the most and how I was able to overcome them. The first one is unhealthy attachment to a goal. I was just obsessed with clearing this MCAT, getting this particular aggregate, and I had this innate desire to somehow control the outcome. And it really impacted my mental health and my ability to move on. The three coping mechanisms that really helped me was the first one, I had to reframe my perspective. I always thought that achieving that goal would save me of all future issues, would absolve me of all potential difficulties and anxieties that I might face in future. But I realized that you're not saved by a result, you're expanded by the process. And this realization really helped me detach from the goal and look at the drawbacks associated with the goal more objectively. Maybe look at the healthcare system, the issues and the stresses and how it's broken and how it can impact my future self. And is it really aligned with how I am, with my personality, with my natural inclinations? And another helpful prompt that really helped me was I asked myself, how would I feel if everyone around just slept, just like in Sleeping Beauty? And I was like, I would not really feel this way. I would be okay. I would just move on. Another coping mechanism that I want to share is change of scene. Stepping away from hostile environments, stepping away from environments that are not able to accept you for who you are, but they see you as a unit of productivity. That does not mean that the people in that environment are necessarily bad people or negative people. It's just that they're also on a journey of their own. And stepping away from that environment and moving into an environment that's more inclusive, that understands your perspectives, and that accepts you for who you are really helps to let go of that attachment, that unhealthy attachment to a goal. The next coping mechanism I want to discuss is adaptive goal adjustment. It's this idea that you can deeply believe in something, but you should still be open to change when things differ. When circumstances change, you should also be open to change. There's a closely related idea that I also want to share. It's called failing fast. It's the idea that if you're on a trajectory for failure, you recognize it instantly and you move on to something that in which you may be better off. And adaptive goal adjustment really helped me align my initial goal of clearing the MCAT with my true values and helped me understand why I was attached to that goal and how detachment would help me. The next barrier to building resilience was fear of failure. And how I coped with it, I started playing sports. as opposed to earlier when I was just focusing on my grades and just studying all day. I started playing sports. And in sports, what happens is you fail every day, you win every day. Some games you'll win, some games you'll lose. And that really builds your tolerance to failure. You understand that life does not follow a trajectory, single trajectory of success or a trajectory for failure. Life, just like a sound wave, is a set of troughs and crests. And after a crest, there's always a trough. And after a trough, there's always a crest. So understanding that perspective and engaging in sports really built my resilience and built my tolerance to the fear of failure. Another coping mechanism that I want to mention is setting small, achievable goals. What happens is when you set small and achievable goals and you're actually able to achieve them, it really enhances your confidence. And with an enhanced confidence, your fear of failure slowly diminishes. The next barrier that I had to overcome was overthinking. When you're constantly thinking and you're stuck in this cycle of unproductive habits and unproductive thoughts, and you're not able to really execute something. So, a prompt that really helped me that I found in the positivity blog was nope, we are not going down that path again. Every time I'd start overthinking and I'd start thinking about these unproductive thoughts, I just stop myself and I tell myself out loud, no, we are not going down that path again. And that instantly would break that cycle of overthinking, of those crazy thoughts. And I was able to come out of it. And another coping mechanism that helped me was practicing mindfulness. The moment you start overthinking, you just move yourself. And by moving yourself, you shift your focus. You don't have to go out and play sport or hike. You can just breathe. You can take a walk. You can do a bit of stretching or maybe a few yoga poses. That instant movement really helps you shift your focus without putting in a lot of effort, which is also a barrier. When you're overthinking, putting effort gets very difficult. And just minimizing the effort and allowing yourself to move really helps. The next coping mechanism is having some dedicated time to reflect. What I did was I would block my time, some specific time in my calendar, and that would be the time I would think about all the things that are going on in my brain and why I'm thinking those things, what's leading to those thoughts, are those thoughts really helpful? And what this did was every time a thought would come, I'd write it on a diary or on a Google Doc. And I'd be like, I'll think about it in the reflection time. And what this did was it protected my execution time. So overthinking, I had a time dedicated to overthinking, and I would think about the thoughts, reflect on them in that time. And while I'm executing tasks, I would not think about anything. I just get rid of those thoughts after I've written them down. And so they're ready to be thought about in the session that I've blocked out. Another coping mechanism that was really helpful was focusing on executing one small task, maybe doing 5 practice questions or responding to 3 emails. Just focusing on one little task really helps you moving. And once you're able to move, you're able to get rid of that cycle. You're able to break into that cycle of overthinking and you are able to execute tasks. The next one is perfectionism. The coping mechanisms that really helped me, the first one is working in layers. So whenever you start a task, you just you make an intention that I'll just get done with the initial draft. You can think of it as the MVP, the minimum viable product. When companies, they want to come up with a product, they'll make just the basic usable version of that product. They'll test it and then they'll see maybe if in further iterations, they'll add more features to the products. So you can think of this initial draft as your MVP. And once you're done with it, you can come back to it at another time, and you can add more details. That can be your second layer of work. And then if you think you need to add something else, you can come back to it later on. And in the third layer, you can add even more minute details. So working in layers, getting done with an initial draft, having this intention that I want to get done with an initial draft, and then we'll see what happens next. Really helped me. And another thing that really helped me was setting timers. What happens is, I want to discuss this idea of Parkinson's law. It's the idea that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. So what happens is, if you have 2 days, you have particular tasks, you'll divide it in 2 days. If you have a week, you might divide it into 7 days. So what happens is, no matter how much time you have, your tasks are still incomplete, are still in progress. With setting timers, what you can do is, it really helps you cut down on that extra thinking that you want to do. So you will put a timer and you'll make an intention that I have to complete X amount of work. I want to respond to X amount of emails, or I want to practice X amount of questions in this time. And because the timer is right in front of you, you're on your toes and you're super focused, and you don't think about the nitty-gritties and the unnecessary thoughts that come in your brain. It really helps you get rid of your perfectionism and just focus on the task to the level that is required. The next barrier that I had to overcome was imposter syndrome. And what helped me cope with it, the first mechanism I want to share is separating feelings from fact. There's this idea of reasonable person standard in law, and they assume that what a hypothetical reasonable person would do in a particular situation. And just thinking about the reasonable person standard and thinking what a reasonable person would do in this situation, in the situation that I am, in this situation of overthinking, in this situation of negative self-talk, what would a reasonable person do? How would they think? And just thinking about how would a reasonable person think, you are able to separate your feelings from fact. You're able to understand that what I'm thinking, that I cannot do this, that's maybe a feeling. That's a feeling of fear. That's not a fact. Fact is, maybe I am capable of doing this. So it really helps you separate feelings from fact. The next coping mechanism is using your past achievements as a proof against your current self-doubt. You just use your past self to inspire your current self. Just think of all the things that you achieved in difficult circumstances, in circumstances you thought things were not possible, but still you were able to do it. You're still the same person. You might be in a rough patch. And I really like this analogy that for sportsmen, they say that sportsmen usually play well, but they can also get into a bad patch or a rough patch. And that's basically when they don't perform well. And once they're able to come out of it, then they again start to perform well. So maybe you can think you're a sportsman of life and you're in a rough patch of your life. And that does not mean you can't accomplish anything and you have to doubt yourself all the time. You can look in the past and you can get inspired from yourself. As I move through the journey, I realized that there are certain factors that really intensify these barriers to building resilience. These include isolation, just staying by yourself in that vicious cycle of thoughts really amplifies and feeds into that. And it's not helpful at all. Burnout is another factor. When you're constantly thinking, when you're constantly stressing, when you're constantly in a state of anxiety, it really amplifies all the negative feelings that you're feeling. And the three factors that I want to discuss with one another is poor lifestyle, bad habits, and a weak character. By poor lifestyle, a lack of structure and a good routine. You don't have a specific time to do a specific task. You don't have a balanced and sustainable lifestyle. Maybe you're just working or not resting, or maybe you're just resting and not working. Bad habits include habits that demonstrate a lack of self-control. This can be in the form of addiction to binge watching or scrolling through social media all the time. And weak character. If there are negative traits in your character, for example, a lack of justice, a lack of integrity, that's built in. That's something that's built in. And if you have a lack of integrity, if you have a lack of sense of justice to the world in particular, you'll feel the same towards yourself. If you're just to the world, you'll do justice to yourself too. And you'll think that I'm just being unjust, I'm being too harsh on myself, I need to be sane and I need to be reasonable. And just having a strong character really helps you pull yourself out of that vicious cycle of overthinking and fear of failure and all those barriers. So make sure you work on these factors so they don't intensify the barriers to building resilience we discussed. I also recognized that these barriers do not work in isolation. They are they are interconnected and they have relationship with one another. And this relationship can be different for different people. In my case, I had attachment, an unhealthy attachment to a goal that led to fear of failure because I was obsessed with that goal and I wanted to get done with it, get that aggregate score no matter what. I wanted to control that outcome, and it led to fear of failure, which fed into overthinking, and that resulted in perfectionism and imposter syndrome, which led into more overthinking. And all of this fed into fear of failure, more and more fear of failure. And the result was lower self-esteem and lower self-belief. And I was able to get rid of this attachment to goal only when I was able to detach myself. And once I got rid of the attachment to the goal, there was nothing that would feed into this cycle. And automatically, I was able to overcome these barriers to resilience. And I had to let go of the attachment to that goal first and foremost, following by letting go of the fear of failure, overthinking, perfectionism, and imposter syndrome to finally be in a position where I can start building resilience. And I'd love for you to add in chat, what were the things that you let go of that made you stronger and better off? And we'll discuss them at the end of the session. Now we'll move on to ways to building resilience. These are basically the traits, the attitudes, the behaviors, and habits. When practiced, they really help you positively cope with situations and challenging times. The first one is optimism. Just having this understanding that life does not move in a straight line. Just like I shared earlier, like a sound wave, it's a series of crests and troughs. And after every upward crest, there will be a downward trough. And after every downward trough, there will be an upward crest. Having this idea and staying positive really helps you positively cope with challenges. The next one is flexibility. By flexibility, not staying stuck. You should understand that even still water gets dirty. You should have the flexibility and wisdom to know when to persist and persevere and when to pivot and let go. Next is emotional regulation. You should have the ability to feel certain feelings, but do not indulge in them. Once you have felt it, you pause and then you respond. The main idea is you don't react, you respond. You act thoughtfully. The next one is gratitude. It's the quality of being grateful. Sometimes I feel privilege blinds you, and you really need to work hard to focus on all the things that are still there, all the things that you still have, instead of focusing only on what's not there and what's missing. And I want to share an anecdote that these Afghan refugees, Pakistan hosted a large number of Afghan refugees a few years ago, and I was crossing through this refugee camp, and it started to rain, and I was thinking to myself, yeah, oh, it's so cold, and it started to rain. What else can go wrong here? And I'm waiting for my mom, trying to find my mom in the market. And on the other side of the market was this Afghan refugee camp, and these kids were trying to light fire. And the moment the first spark appeared, they were full of joy. And I realized sometimes when you're trying to decide what to wear, there are people who might be struggling to survive. And their joy and their happiness really inspired me to be grateful for my life. The next one is self-awareness. Having an understanding of your strengths, your weaknesses, your thought patterns, your behaviors, and their impact on yourself and the world around you. That's something that you need to know to be able to cope successfully and positively with challenges in life. The next thing is healthy lifestyle. It's all the basics like eat, sleep, hydrate, have a routine, spend time with your family, just a sustainable and wholesome way of living. It's basically all the things that we are taught in kindergarten and we just forget them because we are too busy adulting. So just having a sustainable and healthy lifestyle is very helpful. The next one is strengthening character. Your values act as your anchor. When the waves rise, they really keep you steady. And you should learn. And when you learn to stand by your principles in tough circumstances, it really builds your character and it really makes you confident. And these two characteristics help you cope positively with challenges in life. The next one is embracing challenges. You need to understand that life does not come at your own terms, but you should learn to see your unique opportunity. In my case, I had this challenge, and instead of looking at, I had this challenge of, you know, where I failed the exam, and instead of looking at my unique opportunity, I was just looking at myself as another unit of productivity, as another physician that was in line to work in the healthcare sector. That's a great goal, but that was not my unique path. And I needed to understand that to be able to embrace my unique path, I first has to have to embrace this challenge. And I really like this quote of Rumi. He says, if you're irritated by every rub, how will your mirror be polished? And I think that's a beautiful example, and it really inspires you to embrace challenges because you see those challenges not only as struggles, but as a path to success. The next one is spiritual strengthening. Exploring your inner self through whatever form of spirituality you believe in. Maybe you believe in following a religion, or maybe you believe in the power of the universe, or maybe you believe in finding yourself through meditation. Spirituality form, whatever form of spirituality you believe in, you should practice it. And what it does, it really gives your struggle a meaning, and it helps you understand what it means to be human beyond mere the sensory experience. Asking for help, that's really important. Isolation just does not help. You're all by yourself, and sharing your experiences with your closed ones, people who have seen you since you were little, really can tell you how you're feeling, even when you can't yourself describe how you're feeling. Because they have your parents, your grandparents, they have experienced life and they have experienced it way more than you have. And they can really share helpful perspectives and really heal you at times. And seeking help from professionals, that's also important because obviously they are trained to deal with the situations that you're going through. And it can really act as a helpful coping mechanism. The next is spending time in nature. Now, I feel we are an extension of nature too. And going back to where you belong, you really feel a sense of connection. And you really understand perspectives that you might not think of otherwise. Just like the nature, the perspective I shared about letting go and how trees let go of the leaves when they're trying to cope with the changing weathers and with the harsh weathers. That's a perspective that I was able to come up with by spending time in nature and observing nature. Nature really heals you by providing you a sense of connection and perspective. And the next and the last part, and the last way that you can build resilience is by cultivating resilience. Resilience comes from cultivating resilience. There's no way that you just learn the theory and you will be okay. There's a saying that you can't learn to drive in a parked car. You have to get up and start that car and move on. So until and unless you don't practice these skills, you just attend this webinar and you just get done with it, it won't help. You have to practice your skills to cultivate resilience. Now we have come to the second part of this presentation, where I'll be sharing how the resilience that I learned through my personal journey really helped me in workplace situations, especially operations. But sprinkled in a bit will be marketing and finance, since I worked in a startup. So, you have to wear, if you're working in operations in a startup, you have to wear a bunch of hats. And we'll be discussing how I was able to thrive to challenges, professional challenges, and setbacks. And the way I want to differentiate between challenges and setbacks is challenge is a difficult work situation, but it's a situation where I was able to successfully cope on both personal and professional fronts. And the setback was a difficult work situation where I had either a personal or a professional setback, a failure. For example, maybe a mental or emotional breakdown, or maybe I was not able to hit the KPIs. That would be a setback. So we'll be discussing 5 scenarios, 3 challenges and 2 setbacks. So the first one relates to the ever-evolving technological landscape of our times. In COVID, ChatGPT came around and everyone started exploring how they can use AI to enhance their productivity, to enhance the delivery of services that they provide. And the same was the case for our organizations. We started evaluating how we can better deliver our data use cases using AI. And I was the data analysis lead for this internal project. And I had to build a data analysis model in Google Sheets. And we would input the data and we'd compare the AI assisted data versus the traditional human collected data. And it was a lot of work, a lot of back and forth, a lot of stress, because everyone was moving very fastly with AI. Everything was moving fast. And there were bottlenecks I had to deal with, crazy long communication loops, a lot of back and forth communication. But I was able to execute the project successfully and present the weekly findings to our founder and CEO for throughout the weeks that the project continued. And I want to share the 3 attributes that enabled me to overcome this challenge with resilience. Relying on self-awareness and flexibility. When I was proactive and when I saw that my limits were being stretched, I had enough self-awareness to understand that I cannot do this on my own. I have limits. And I was flexible enough to understand, to adapt and understand that more team members need to be added and I need to delegate my tasks. So these 2 attributes really helped me cope with this challenging work situation with resilience. And the other attribute that helped me was embracing challenges. I did not think negatively. There was no negative chatter in my brain, no negative self-talk. I had an attitude of embracing challenges. I had an understanding that I'll grow beyond my comfort zone. And by this, I was able to transform that potential burnout into balanced productivity. And I was able to grow through this challenge. The next scenario is a setback, and we'll be discussing how the pressure to perform really impacted my mental health at a certain point in my professional journey. In operations, and especially in startups, you don't have a backup for a particular person. And there's a lot of significant external pressure to perform. You're expected to get done with tasks and hit those KPIs, even at personal cost. What happened was I had to reconcile 2 databases of project times and then prepare and send client invoices. And since I mentioned my team was distributed across Asia and the US, coordinating with the project leads who were entering those project times was honestly quite challenging. because even people who were working in my time zone had flexible schedules. So if I was working in the daytime, they would be working in the night. And what happened was I had this fear that I'll have to face the repercussions if I don't get done with the client invoices on time. And I would be considered unprofessional and unable to deal with minor workplace situations. And out of that fear, I what I did was I was just working constantly throughout the day, throughout the night. I'd always be waiting for people's responses. And the moment someone would respond, I'd reply immediately and try to get done with that reconciliation then and there. What happened at the end was the reconciliation and the client invoices were completed on time, but because of disrupted rest, I ended up in burnout. Although I demonstrated lower resilience, what helped me cope with this situation to some extent was emotional regulation. Even under stress, I maintained my focus and I was able to get done with the tasks on time. And I acted thoughtfully. Usually, when you're under immense stress and pressure, what happens is you just get agitated and irritated. You tend to take the people who love you for granted, and you talk to them. You tend to talk to them in a very mean and rude way. And the same can happen with your colleagues, especially subordinates. And just practicing that emotional regulation really helped me cope with this situation to some extent. But since this was a setback, I thought to reflect on it in order to understand what really went wrong and what were the lessons that I could learn. And if we think about what was the setback, it was a personal setback in the form of burnout. And I realized that I needed to practice a few of these resilience building attributes even more to strengthen my ability to apply them under high pressure situations. The first one that I needed to practice more was self awareness. Having an understanding of my boundaries and understanding that responsibility does not mean 24/7 availability. I'm a human and I need to work, and I can only work till a particular time. I cannot work 24/7. So that self awareness I needed to practice more and understand my boundaries. The next one that I needed to practice was strengthening character. I had to understand that communicating challenges is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of self awareness and accountability. And I should have questioned the expectation that in face of bottlenecks and broken processes, I could break, but the deadline could not. I should have questioned this expectation first and foremost in this situation. And the next attribute that I really needed to practice was a healthy lifestyle. I had to learn to balance commitment with the rest because that's the only way you can sustain performance. Otherwise, an unhealthy lifestyle is not sustainable. You will break down at one point or the other. So I learned that I need to further practice these particular ways to build even higher resilience. And this further practice would help me in future when I am under high pressure situations, and I will be able to cope with them. And hopefully in future, this setback will be turned into a challenging situation where I'll cope successfully. Scenario 3 is a challenge, and it's about the unique feedback loops of distributed teams. With distributed teams across regions, and also while working in a remote setup, a lot of the feedback that you get is not face to face. It's usually on Slack. On Slack, if you post something or if a project is completed, mostly people will react with the very nice, upbeat emojis. But when formal feedback comes back in the form of surveys or like the specific forms that make part of the internal databases and your official feedback, that's where you find that people have shared some serious concerns or maybe they have pointed out some shortcomings. in the project that you worked. And you're thinking that on Slack, it was a thumbs up emoji. And in the in the official feedback, it's a 2.3 star rating. And you're like, how did thumbs up convert into a 2.3 star rating? And what I realized, this contrast, I realized would feel confusing and honestly very emotionally draining. We'll be trying to dissect this person has shared a thumbs up, but last time the thumbs up was followed by a poor rating, and what are they thinking at this point in time, etc. And what I realized was that in order to cope with this situation, optimism and emotional regulation really helped me. I maintained an empathetic attitude. I understood that there's not an emoji for every feeling that you have. There's an emoji if you're feeling good, it's like a smiley, an upward smiling face. If you're feeling bad, it's an inverted smiley. And if you're feeling okay-ish, it's just like straight face. And honestly, that's triggering. If someone shows me a straight face, I'd be concerned and I'd be like really mad at them that what's wrong with you. And just to avoid this potential conflict, when people are feeling okay-ish, they'll usually, instead of moving towards a more negative emoji, they'll move towards a more positive emoji. And that can sometimes signal the wrong image. The next person might think everything is fine. The person who reacted with the emoji is thinking some things are fine. No one would go and show a thumbs down or maybe react with a disgust emoji. So that can be a little difficult to decipher. But maintaining an empathetic attitude and understanding that emojis don't express the entire range of feelings that humans feel really helped me. And every time there was an emoji, I just tried to be optimistic about it and understand the other person's perspective. And emotional regulation also helped me. Sometimes the contrast was significant. In the case I mentioned, from a thumbs up to a 2.3 star rating, from a thumbs up to a 4.5 would be okay. But this was a significant contrast. And what I realized was that this was not okay. I cannot, if I'm optimism in this situation, honestly, that's toxic optimism. And I don't want to be that person. So when the contrast was significant, what I would do was I was practice emotional regulation and act thoughtfully, and I'd address it clearly and respectfully. And that really helped me get out of that cycle of constantly thinking what this person is going through and what they're thinking and what might be the repercussions for myself. So optimism and emotional regulation really helped me cope with this situation. And I was able to come out of it successfully. Scenario 4 is a setback, and it relates with dealing with tasks beyond core capabilities. As I mentioned, I was working at a startup, so I worked a bit with the marketing team as well, and I had to improve the website's Google search rankings. I did a lot of experimentation and research, but the progress was limited. I was not able to hit the KPIs in totality. And finally, I requested that we need to bring in a specialist because this task requires a specialist skill set. And eventually we had to bring in a specialist. And the way these attributes of asking for help and optimism helped me was I sought external help. I was not stuck on doing things on my own, and it was helpful in dealing with the situation. And optimism, I stayed optimistic despite that initial failure. I did not respond negatively. Rather, I focused on identifying lessons learned and the areas for growth. And I continue to learn throughout the process. So if we discuss what was the setback, it was a professional setback. It was an unfinished task that I was assigned, and I was unable to fully meet the KPIs. And the lesson that I learned was that I need to cultivate better flexibility and adapt faster. Because if I collaborated early on and didn't spend too much hours and resources on the research and experimentation, this setback would have been converted into a challenge and the resources would not have been wasted. I recognized that flexibility needs to be further practiced so I'm able to adapt faster. And the last challenge is pressure to prove myself. What happened was in my team, in my organization, becoming a project lead was the ultimate track for higher pay and honestly, prestige and more validation. But this role required pushing through late nights and pulling all nighters. And that's not what I was looking for. Usually, people would come in as team members and then move on to become project leads. But because most of our clients were based in the US, we had to spend our time at night, just waking up at night and collaborating with these clients. And I knew my limits. I knew my boundaries that I have to protect my health. I don't take it for granted. And I decided to choose my unique path. And what I did was I chose to stay in my operations role. Instead of chasing titles, I focused on working more on my expertise and expanding the breadth and depth of my operations skill set. And what really helped me cope with the situation successfully and not succumb to the external pressure and this external validation that someone who's a project lead is the only person who's worth it. As long as you're not a project lead or you don't have that title with it, you're not entitled to prestige or maybe self-care. And what really helped me cope with this challenge was self-awareness. I respected and maintained my personal boundaries, flexibility. I was open to learning. I was not stuck. I was not attached to that title of becoming a project lead. And I was open to learning and growth. And that what led me to become even better in my operations role. And the next one was strengthening character, staying true to what I believed in, staying aligning with what my values were, taking care of your health, having a sustainable lifestyle, maintaining boundaries, really helped me cope with this challenge successfully. And now we'll move on to the Q&A and discussion. But before I end my presentation and take any questions, I'd like to finish by saying, just like these trees in the background who have coped successfully with winters and have bloomed fully in spring, I hope that all of you, through these coping mechanisms and all the strategies and learnings that you had through this webinar, you're able to cope with the autumns and winters of your life and bloom beautifully in the springs of your life.